Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into something we all deal with, the ego. You sent us this YouTube video, Master Your Ego, Achieve Success and Growth in 2025. It's packed with advice.
Oh yeah, this video really hammers home that getting the ego is like essential, for success in any part of life.
It even goes as far as saying unveiling the concept of ego and its impact on personal growth is like uncovering the hidden layer of ourselves that, once understood, can propel us towards unprecedented achievements.
Right.
But before we get too deep, maybe we should start with the basics.
Okay, yeah.
What exactly is the ego, according to this video, I mean?
Well, they define it as that inner voice, the one, constantly judging us. Our worth, our ability is always whispering like, you're not good enough. Or, sometimes it's the opposite, like, you're better than everyone else.
That sounds exhausting.
It is.
And it shapes how we see the world, right?
Ourselves, the world, everything.
Okay, but here's what I'm getting tripped up on. This video says the ego can be a motivator and also a saboteur.
Yeah.
So which is it?
That's the thing. It's both. Like, that's what makes the ego so tricky, so interesting. It can push us to succeed, to be ambitious.
But then hold us back at the same time.
Exactly. With self-doubt, fear, all that, a total double-edged sword.
It's like having a coach who cheers you on 1 minute and then tells you you'll never make the team the next.
Yeah.
So how do we even start to make sense of that?
Well, this is where it gets cool, I think. The video goes into the science of the ego, the brain stuff.
Okay, tell me more.
So, neuroscientists, they found that the ego, it's linked to activity in a specific part of our brains, the prefrontal cortex. Have you heard of that?
Vaguely.
It's the area that controls decision-making, self-control, that kind of thing.
So our ego is literally hardwired into how we make decisions.
It is.
That's kind of freaky when you think about it.
It can be, but here's the thing. If we understand what's going on up there in our brains, that gives us power, right, to take control.
I mean, I guess. But how do we even know when our ego's hijacking our choices?
You have to really tune in. Pay attention. But, if we can figure out those moments when our ego is calling the shots, then we can start making choices based on what we really want, not what our ego thinks we should want.
That makes sense. It's like being true to ourselves.
Yeah.
But how does the ego actually do that? Influence our choices, I mean. It's not like there's a tiny version of ourselves in our brain making all the calls, right?
Right. It's more like it shapes our perceptions, our motivations. Like, say you get offered a promotion at work.
Okay, yeah.
Your ego might whisper, you're not ready.
Even if you are.
Even if you totally are. Or it might be the opposite. Push you to take a huge risk.
Just to prove something.
To yourself, to others, yeah. And it might not even be a good risk.
So the ego's always trying to protect its own image.
In a way, yeah. Even if it means making decisions that aren't really the best for us in the long run.
Okay, so how do we become more aware of when our ego is driving the bus?
Honestly, pay attention to your gut, to how you feel. Strong emotions like anxiety, defensiveness, those can be big red flags.
Interesting.
Another clue is if you're more worried about how a decision makes you look than how it'll actually impact your life.
I've totally been there.
Okay.
More times than I care to admit. Now, I know this video also talks about how the ego can mess with our relationships.
Oh, yeah.
And it specifically mentions this need for validation and control. So how does that play out, like, day to day with other people?
When the ego's in charge, running the show, it's like we put our own needs first, always, like above anyone else's.
And that makes it hard to do what?
To listen, to compromise, to really see things from someone else's perspective.
It's all about me.
Basically.
So it creates this imbalance. It's not really a two-way street anymore.
Exactly.
It becomes more about feeding the ego than actually, connecting with the other person.
Right.
What are some signs, would you say, that our ego's causing problems in our relationships?
Let's see. Do you always have to be right?
Uh-oh.
Do you struggle to say sorry? Admit you're wrong?
Maybe.
And are you, like, super sensitive to criticism?
Asking for a friend.
Okay. But those are all things to watch out for. They can mean your ego's getting in the way of real connection.
Okay, so we've established that the ego can be a bit of a troublemaker.
Definitely.
But this video also talked about successful people.
Yes.
And how they've somehow learned to use their ego differently.
To channel that energy constructively.
Right, like how do they do that?
Well, the video has some thoughts on that, and that's actually a perfect place to pick up next time.
Ooh, cliffhanger. All right, well, we'll have to wait for part 2 to unpack that one.
See you then.
Can't wait.
Welcome back. We're in the middle of this deep dive on the ego and how to, wrangle it a bit.
Right. Last time we were talking about successful people
Mm-hmm.
and how they somehow manage to, use their ego to their advantage.
Yes. This video says they've learned to channel their ego's energy, but constructively.
It's like they've trained it to work for them, not against them.
Exactly. Like, remember that metaphor from before about the ego blinding us to our flaws?
Yeah, the Hall of Mirrors thing.
Right. So this video takes that idea even further. It says an unchecked ego, it basically exaggerates our good qualities too, creates this huge gap between how we see ourselves and reality.
So it's not just that we're blind to our flaws. It's like we're looking at ourselves through rose-colored glasses, too.
Exactly.
But what kind of damage does that do, really? Like out in the real world, not just in our heads.
Well, in our personal lives, it can lead to arrogance, that whole better than everyone else attitude.
Right.
And it makes it hard to be empathetic.
So we end up being that person no one wants to hang out with.
Pretty much. But it's not just about being popular.
What else?
This kind of unchecked ego, it can really mess up our relationships. We end up needing constant validation, needing to be in control.
Which doesn't leave a lot of room for actual connection.
Nope. Just a lot of resentment and conflict.
And I bet it doesn't do us any favors at work either.
Oh, for sure. This video talks about how an unchecked ego can lead to really impulsive decisions, makes it hard to handle any kind of criticism.
Forget about teamwork.
Yeah, collaboration is out the window. And all of that can really hold us back in our careers.
So even if we have all the talent in the world, our ego can still trip us up.
Totally. It's like we're sabotaging ourselves. But here's the good news. We don't have to be at the mercy of our ego. This video, it offers a lot of practical advice on how to manage it.
Finally, some solutions. Because honestly, all this talk about the ego running wild has been kind of stressing me out.
I hear you. So one strategy the video really emphasizes is self-awareness.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It's about recognizing those moments when our ego starts taking over, Our thoughts, our feelings, our actions.
Like being able to spot it in the act before it gets too out of control.
Yes, like having that inner alarm system.
But how do we develop that?
Well, it takes practice.
I bet.
But the video suggests starting small, like just noticing how you react to things. Do you get defensive when someone criticizes you? Do you feel like you have to prove yourself all the time?
Guilty as charged.
Those are all little hints that your ego might be at play.
Okay, so once we start to see those patterns, then what?
Then we can start using some of the techniques the video talks about, like practicing empathy, for example.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. It's about putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Seeing the world from their perspective.
And when you can do that, it's easier to let go of that need to be right.
To control everything.
To constantly validate your own ego, yeah.
So it's about shifting from me to we.
Exactly.
I'm guessing this is helpful not just in our personal lives, but at work, too.
Oh, yeah.
It creates a more, collaborative, harmonious environment.
Definitely. Another technique the video talks about is setting realistic goals.
How does that tie into the ego?
Well, when our goals are too big or too unrealistic, it's like we're setting ourselves up for failure, right?
Yeah.
And when that happens, our ego goes into overdrive.
Trying to protect us from feeling bad.
Exactly. So the video suggests breaking down your goals.
Into smaller steps.
Yes.
Yeah.
That way you can celebrate your progress along the way. Build confidence without letting your ego run wild.
It's about enjoying the process, not just obsessing over the end goal.
Right.
The video also talks about learning from our mistakes.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
I mean, our first instinct is usually to, beat ourselves up when we mess up.
Our ego wants to protect us from feeling bad.
But this video says we should embrace failure.
Embrace it as a learning experience. That way it becomes an opportunity for growth,
It's like reframing it.
Exactly. And when we're not afraid to fail, we're more likely to take risks, try new things.
And they can lead to bigger successes down the road.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Yeah.
Another thing this video talks about, which I think is so important, is surrounding yourself with the right people.
Okay, so who are the right people when it comes to managing our ego?
People who are honest with you, who support you, but also challenge you, to grow.
It's like if you're trying to eat healthy
Yeah.
and you're hanging out with people who only eat junk food, it's not going to help.
Exactly. You need people who will call you out when your ego's getting out of control.
But also celebrate your wins.
And just support your journey overall.
Okay, so those are some strategies. But what's the, The big payoff.
You mean from mastering this whole ego thing?
Yeah, like what's the point? Does the video talk about that at all?
It does. And get this. It says that mastering your ego can lead to more success in your career, deeper relationships, and even a greater sense of purpose in life.
Wow, that's a lot. But is it really that simple?
Well, not quite. The video is very clear that managing your ego, it's an ongoing thing. It's not like you achieve it and then you're done.
It's a journey.
Exactly. You got to keep working at it. But the rewards, they're definitely worth it.
So it's not about being perfect. It's
No.
about, making progress.
Exactly.
It's about being open to learning and growing.
And speaking of learning and growing, we've still got more to explore in this deep dive. We'll pick up in part 3 with the video's final insights on how to really make lasting change.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking all about the ego, how it can trip us up, how we can manage it.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
From, the brain stuff to how it shows up in our relationships, our careers.
And now I'm really curious to see what this video has to say about, okay, we get it, the ego's complicated,
Right.
but how do we actually make lasting change?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the video, it does offer some answers. One thing that really stuck with me was this emphasis on staying connected to your values.
That makes sense. If we know what really matters to us, it's easier to make choices that are, in line with that, even when our ego is trying to pull us in another direction.
Exactly. Like, the video uses this example of someone who really values honesty, but they're tempted to lie at work, to protect their image or something.
Classic ego move.
Yeah, right. It's like, we want to look good.
Even if it means, being shady.
Yeah, but the video's point is when we make choices that go against our values, we end up feeling empty, even if we get what we wanted,
So it's not just about what we do, it's why we do it.
Exactly. The motivation behind it matters.
So how do we stay connected to our values then? Does the video offer any, practical tips?
It does. One thing it suggests is to actually write down your values, like create a personal mission statement.
Oh, I like that idea.
Right. It's like having a compass to help you navigate all those tough choices.
And make sure you're staying true to yourself.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about values, ego management, but I want to zoom out for a sec.
Okay.
Does this video connect ego mastery to, success?
That's a good question. I mean, I would assume so, but...
It does. It basically argues that mastering your ego isn't just good for personal growth. It's actually essential for success in any area of life.
I can see that. If we're not constantly battling our ego, we have more energy to focus on our goals.
Right. And this video, it points out that those classic ego-driven behaviors...
Like what?
Arrogance, defensiveness that need to control everything.
Yeah. No.
Those actually sabotage our success. They create conflict, make it hard to work with others.
It's like building a house on a shaky foundation.
Ah.
It might look good at first, but it's not going to last.
That's a great way to put it. This video says true success comes from, humility, integrity, and a willingness to learn.
So being open to feedback, even when it's hard to hear.
Especially when it's hard.
Because our ego is going to want to reject it.
Oh, for sure.
But the video is saying if we can push past that,
Yeah.
it can actually help us grow.
It's a chance to see ourselves more clearly, figure out how we can get better.
The video also talks about celebrating our successes, but not letting them go to our heads.
Yeah.
It's a tough balance, right?
It is.
How do you celebrate without, getting a big head about it?
It's about acknowledging your achievements, but staying humble.
So you can be proud of yourself without being, arrogant.
Right. It's remembering that success is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, more to do.
I like that. It keeps things in perspective.
And this video ends on such a good note.
What does it say?
It reminds us that this whole ego thing, it's not about being perfect.
Okay.
It's about progress.
I like that. It takes the pressure off. We're all just works in progress. Really.
Exactly. And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the ego. We hope you found it helpful.
Remember, this is just the beginning. The real work starts now.
Take these ideas, apply them to your life, see what happens.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep.